Here we are with another NZ Aviation podcast. The recording date for this program is the 20th of May, 2019 already. And Martin Noakes joins me. And Martin, wow, what a stunning outcome in the Australian federal election over this past weekend. I don't know what the implications are for aviation, but it kind of seemed from this side of the Tasman anyway, it's come as a bit of a surprise to the media at least. What happened?
Man, I was watching ABC when the first numbers came back, and here they had the pundits. They had a Liberal and a Labour pundit there, and the Labour pundit was Penny Wong, who was penned in to be the new foreign minister for the incoming Labour government, because everybody was pretty convinced it was going to be an incoming Labour government. And man, did faces get long pretty quick. And then when the magnitude of the defeat set in, oh dear, it was. Have you been reading any of the tweets about the? You just got to read some of the tweets.
No, I haven't. I'm
online.
I'm hoping that you can maybe give us a few, or the nature of what they sound like anyway, or what people are saying.
Lots of people are absolutely devastated. Oh, I give up now. I'm leaving Australia. They've voted in a homophobic, Islamophobic, Nazi. Blah blah blah, and it just goes on and on and on. And it's whatever you think, they were obviously, this is the election that nobody thought Labour would lose, and basically Queensland and Tasmania just wiped them out.
Wow.
Just wiped them out.
I saw Scott Morrison doing his victory speech. He said that he'd always believed in miracles. I wonder if even he was surprised. But who are the ones who are saying this wasn't supposed to happen, this shouldn't have happened? Are these people that were, in their own bubble, or are these, real McCoy pundits who should know which way the wind's blowing, getting it wrong? I mean, what was the failure here in knowing where the electorate was going to go?
Well, polling was completely wrong because apparently it's very difficult to do reliable polling anymore, and they're laying this down to the death of the landline. So they used to have a directory of numbers, several thousand numbers they could call, that they could reliably call, and a random sample, and they'd get a result. Well, most people don't have landlines anymore. And actually, if you call anybody during the day or the early evening, unless it's a business phone, very few people answer their landline, because it's invariably somebody trying to sell you something from an overseas call center.
I think also, and this may be also a phenomenon in the US, there's this thing where people are now perceiving pollsters as part of the liberal side of politics. And if you're a conservative thinker or voter, anywhere past, just a fraction past the middle, you're inclined not to engage with them, so you'll turn down polling opportunities. You won't take part, and really you'll just wait for election day, because they always say that we don't have landlines. Well, surely if the polling companies are worth their salt, they would have sorted how to get around that ages ago. Otherwise, they don't have a viable business, do they?
Well, there is a guy from one of the universities in Melbourne, I forget his name, who he's a statistician and data miner, and he said exactly that. He says that's just an excuse because, this guy picked Trump, he picked Brexit, he picked even the marginal seats in this election, and he says the way I do that is I just go and mine social media. And he says, I don't need any special access to do that. He says, I can scrape it off. I can go to a comments page on Twitter or anything and just scrape the details off and put them in a database. And I do that enough times, I get a pretty good picture, he's saying. I get a pretty good picture of what people are really thinking. And then he applies his mathematical magic to that. And, he's quite accurate. I mean, particularly in these marginal seats, he was forecasting that, seats that Labour held that needed quite a large swing to the Liberals to win. He picked them. He said, no, they're going to win this one, this one, this one, this one. And he was right. And he says, I just did that using the data available and not relying on the old system, which relied upon landlines. I mean, I say landlines.
That's so lame.
I don't even know what that's got to do. I don't even know what that's got to do.
That might have been a problem 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. Everyone knows how it is now. Again, I say, if you're a polling company and you're only calling landlines, hey, if I'm looking for polling companies, I'd say get another polling company. Get one that actually calls mobiles. No, that's not right. I think there's something in the perception that a lot of people have of that part of the machinery of politics and media. And that's, like you say, it happened in the US. And I think, again, one of those, the phenomenon at work there was that people didn't want to admit they were following Trump to someone over the phone, you know?
Yep.
Anyway, now here's another question. I'm interested in this because of the broadcasting side of it. You've got the ABC. It is obviously, everybody says it's left-leaning and has been, depending on the commentators you listen to, that there's been a bias towards the Labour and Greens in this federal election. It costs $1 billion, the Aussie taxpayers, including you probably, $1 billion to run the ABC. With all that, I don't want to use the word bias, but, I think it's well accepted that state-funded media in the UK, in Australia, and to a certain extent here, does have by its very nature, a liberal bias. I think we can agree on that. But with all that money spent and thinking they were so right, they still didn't get the electorate over the line. They went the other way. Well, so that calls into question, doesn't it, is the ABC disconnected from the majority of Australian taxpayers? And if so, does that justify the spend on the ABC?
Well, we have to be careful. The $1 billion that the ABC gets, they spend an awful lot of that money on providing, what is a really great TV network. The ABC, it's not just news and political comment. They do provide a lot of really good programming. Now, the funds that go towards then the news and the information programming. I don't know how much that is, but yes, they're obviously biased. You can watch them, and they are obviously biased. Every now and again, they bring in a token opposite view, but it's quite clear we've got this person in because they're an opposite view, not because we're looking for balance. Is the money worth it? Well, if you look at
not so much is it worth it. Are people questioning whether they deserve? If they're that disconnected from the majority of Australians, then half the taxpayers or more have a right to say, well, are my taxes worth spending on this?
Yeah, well, and that's absolutely being called into question. But if you look at where the ABC's, if you look at the Australia, the major support for, let's call it the left, is central cities, most of them, all of them, and Canberra, and that's where the ABC probably draws all its people from as well. So it's they're operating in their own bubble, and they might not see it. They're trying to present an Australia which rightly, or for better or for worse, is not the Australia which is actually out there. And I think this election has smashed that home to a number of people. Most Australians don't sit at home at night hand-wringing about minorities and climate change.
Interesting. Very
Whether
interesting.
or not they should or not, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But they're not, and that's been brought home. The whole Labour campaign was about how caring and how they're going to put more money into hospitals and more money into minority rights and more money into this, but
emotional stuff, appealing to emotions,
and how they were going to smash the top end of town and give the workers a fair go. Well, the way Australia's changed, there's actually not that many so-called workers. If you're in the building industry here, or even if you're working in factory work these days, the cost of employment and the associated compliance costs of actually hiring anybody, most people are subcontractors, self-employed subcontractors. Certainly in the building industry, building companies don't hire their own people anymore. If you build a house, it's all subbies. Even factories, even the industries I work with, they're hiring more and more temps simply because it's too expensive to take on full-time employees. So when Bill Shorten or the Labour Party or whoever goes out and says, we're going to smash the top end of town, as Howard, ex-Prime Minister Howard, pointed out at a town hall meeting a couple of days ago, he said to the audience, he said, listen, guys, when Bill Shorten's talking about the top end of town, and then he waved his hand over the crowd, he said, Bill Shorten's talking about you guys, small business owners, self-employed builders, self-employed bricklayers, all this type of thing. So I think that's what, the left was in their bubble fighting a class war which doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah, with very emotional appeals.
Very emotional.
And that horrible term, virtue signalling, I guess.
Yeah, and Liberals, I mean, everyone says they fought a very negative campaign. Well, most campaigns are negative.
They're always.
They always are. Labour thought they had such an unassailable lead. They came out with some, frankly, bizarre policies, and lots of them. So they kind of kept chopping and changing. But then the Liberals summed us up with a poster. And I have to say, I mean, I'm an outsider looking in, so I don't really care one way or the other. But they had this poster of Bill Shorten looking a little bit shifty, as he can. And the line under the poster was, "Here's one bill Australia can't afford."
Yeah, simple but effective. Yeah,
simple but effective. And Scott Morrison ran this whole thing basically on his own. He was everywhere.
Yeah,
he was everywhere.
It's an interesting outcome, and were the media pundits almost crying like they did when Trump won on the night? They started crying and having emotional breakdowns and tantrums.
Some of them were very upset. Yes. And so now the recriminations are coming out, and it's pretty ugly. It's pretty ugly. Labour is probably going to go through one of those stages where they rip themselves apart, because now they're going to go further left, right? That generally always happens.
Yeah, well, it doesn't seem very intuitive, considering that didn't get them over the line. Anyway, interesting. Here is a bit of a segue that maybe links to aviation, considering the way the Aussie federal electorate has gone over this weekend, and you would say they're probably in the middle, but they're slightly on the conservative side. Otherwise, they would have elected those Labour and Greens. What are people making of Israel Folau, the rugby player, being fired, and Qantas, the major sponsor, being cited as one of the disapproving, entities, sponsors responsible for him going? People who have possibly elected in this government will also be sympathetic with Israel Folau's position. And I see one commentator I saw online calling for a boycott of Qantas over this.
Well, actually, both candidates in the last election, Bill and Scott Morrison, they both said they were a little bit unsettled about how this whole Israel Folau thing's going, because they think it went too far. The fact that Qantas is involved has upset a lot of people. If you read online, a lot of people are saying, "Guys, you're an airline. You're not meant to be running social policy." Qantas has got into...
Yeah, but let's remember that the CEO of Qantas is gay, so people are going to associate that, and I can imagine why, and sympathise with the CEO of Qantas for being, grumpy and not too happy with that tweet, which was just a tweet. But come on, so what? Life goes on. You're a big boy. Handle it. And you're the CEO of a major airline. It's nothing to you.
Yeah. It shouldn't be anything to him. They shouldn't get involved in stuff like that. I don't think they should. I mean, okay, Israel Folau quoted the Bible. Whether you agree with it or not, that's your position. You can say something against that if you want to, but for the guy to lose his livelihood over what he believes, and he sincerely believes it, I believe, and what many of his teammates also believe, they just haven't said it.
45% of the major rugby players in Australia are Pacifica background, and most of them are born-again Christians.
There you
go. You would feel sympathy, and I'm not like an avowed Christian. I'm not an atheist, but I've got my own ideas. But I can imagine if Christians feel a bit grumpy being treated in this way, considering the country's been founded on Christianity. It's been the main religion, and other religious groups that have come in have been promoted and in very positive light. So this could leave the Christian community feeling a little pissed off,
Well, I think it should. And I think something should be done about it. And I hope that Israel Folau goes on and appeals it, because there is talk of him not appealing his dismissal, but taking his case to the High Court, because that is religious discrimination, isn't it? I mean, there's all this talk about, it's hate speech, and it's not hate speech. Otherwise, you'd have to ban the Bible.
Yeah, interesting times. And in the meantime, air travel still goes on. Aviation still in business until what? The Greens, as Trump always says, try to make you take a train to Hawaii.
Well, talking about airline businesses, Virgin's not looking great, losing more money, as we said on a number of these shows. It's going to be interesting to see how long Virgin can go. They're going to be pulling back some of their Trans-Tasman operation.
Oh.
They just don't make money. They've tried to become a Qantas light. Yeah, the old Virgin, the very old Virgin.
Why did they do that? Why did they do that?
Because they got a failed CEO candidate from Qantas, decided he'd go and teach Qantas a lesson, and he tried to make a mirror image of Qantas and has failed. Because at the end of the day, if you're flying exactly the same planes to exactly the same places for exactly the same price, and you're happy enough with Qantas, why would you change? And nobody did.
The other thing is, in the meantime, Qantas has set up Jetstar.
Yes.
Which is, so they've got the worst of all worlds, Virgin Australia, haven't they?
Yes.
Against
them.
They
should have stuck to their knitting, which was the original Aussie low-cost airline. And they would be smaller, but that's all about this whole growth thing. Hey, everyone's just obsessed with growth. But, yeah, trying to copy Qantas and Qantas' market was never going to work.
So what's going to happen, do you think?
Well, they're going to have to restructure, I reckon. They will restructure or sell more of themselves to somebody else. I don't see how they can continue on their current path. Because, you have to say, they got nothing. You know what I mean?
We've speculated in the past too also, and this may be an issue now, that the Virgin brand is not what it was. No, it's not. I mean, the very name was meant to be a bit sort of edgy and racy, not now.
When it came out in the 70s. No, who cares?
So maybe none of it makes sense for Australia anymore, really. How are they doing with those flights over to the US? They're still going, and they've got. Where do they send their A330s?
I think they go to Asia, and they do cross continent.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, but they're 777. That was apparently they were going to have a fleet of 12 or so of those originally. I still think they were. Well, they got 3 or 4, not many.
Not many. All right, so let's. I mean, if it's going to be, if something's going to happen, it'll happen within the next year or so, won't it? It'd have to.
Yes. They can't go on throwing. They can't go on throwing money away the way they are, and they keep having. IT issues. Last week no one could check in, so there were hours and hours of delays. Most of the times I've flown with Virgin. And I used to fly with Virgin simply because they had the Air New Zealand tie-in. Not that was in use at all. In fact, I gave up after a while and started flying Qantas simply because the service was better. It just was. But most times I flew Virgin, there was a delay. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So let's see what happens there. On this side of the Tasman, Air New Zealand executives have frozen their salaries for at least a year as part of cost cutting. I remember once when I worked in broadcasting and the entity was in trouble, and the first people to lose their jobs were the tea ladies, and they were the least paid. They were the canary down the mine. Now you're not going to save. It's only a virtue signalling thing. I think Luxon's already on over $4 million a year. Money saved from not paying the executives anymore is not going to buy them much more fuel. They say that jet fuel has gone up and that it's been an eye-watering increase. Extra 200 mil, I think, was the figure on their next year's operation with that current jet fuel price. But it seems to me that 200 million is within the normal bounds of airline numbers. When things go up and down, it's not even it's the price of one aircraft. That's
plus when fuel was high last time, they grew quite nicely. They were doing well. So
what's going on?
You know what it is. It's costs and margins they're on a ratchet. So you start charging more for your tickets, you start increasing your margin, you start making a bit more money, you start employing more people, you start thinking you're invincible, but it's a ratchet. It goes up, 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 up. I mean, the moment something starts fading or starts sort of tailing off, there's a major panic because, and this is the problem with a lot of the way things work these days. It's growth obsessed. Now whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But the older I get and the more experienced I get, I do wonder is how can you have continual growth, and should you even be aiming for continual growth? But airlines, that seems to be the accepted business model.
Well,
every business model, it's just growth.
Their company-wide review resulted in the deferral of $750 million in aircraft capital spending. That tells you a lot. And $50 million of deferred spending elsewhere. The interesting thing is they've deferred the delivery of 3 A321neos by a year.
Yes.
Now, that operating for them in that year theoretically should make them more money than anything that's there operating now. So why would they defer the A321s?
Well, they might get the fleet a bit smaller. They just might not operate any. They might not operate 3 A20s or A321s. They just say, all right, we're not going to add that capacity.
Yeah, but if you've got an A320 that you can take out of service and put in an A321 that still burns just a bit less fuel but carries 40 or 50 more passengers, even if it costs you more, you'd incline to do that. The extra revenue in a year would be a lot, wouldn't it?
If fuel was expensive.
Yeah, but they say fuel has gone up to eye-watering levels, so that's what they're saying.
Yeah, you think they'd take the savings wherever they could get them, eh?
Yeah, I got a feeling that that they're not doing so well, and they're finding ways to let the air out of the tyre slowly, so it doesn't look like they're taking too many big hits right now.
Well, I think some of the $750 million that they're saving is going to be that their fleet expansion, their wide-body fleet expansion, is not going to be all that it was originally thought to be. So my take is the press, well, there's rumours out there that they've decided to go with Boeing. Now, a lot of people are getting excited. Oh, it means they're going to get 777-8s and 787-9s and 78Js and blah, blah, blah. I suspect they're going to get another 8 to 10 787s, maybe a mix of 900s and 1000s, or maybe just 900s and some 900 long ranges. And they're going to, probably with GE engines, because they do have a slightly better fuel burn than the Rolls-Royce on the very long legs. And I expect they will use 787s to drive their expansion on some of these long and thin routes. But, there's always been talk of Air New Zealand flying deep into South America and everything. Well, they're going to have to do a lot to market that, because very few people actually fly to South America. Even if you pick up onward people from Australia, there's not that many people who fly to South America.
Well, they want to take people from China, but they can't get the slots.
The Chinese aren't going to play with that. So I think they've cut the idea of getting a diversified or bigger long range fleet. I don't think they're going to get 777s. Too expensive, and they don't need to fly 400 people anywhere.
Right.
I think it's going to be they're going to double down on the 78, which is unfortunate because A, I would have liked to have flown in a new 777, and B, I don't really like flying in 789s because they are pretty tight.
Yeah. I'm wondering about A350s. I see Japan Airlines have just flown their first A350, and that'll be the first time, I think, since, what was that airline that used to fly domestically around Japan? They had Airbuses. Oh, what were they? They had the stripy, colourful tail. Remember that?
Yeah, another one, yeah.
A Japanese air service, JAS, was it, or something?
JAS, yeah. And didn't they get taken over by ANA, and ANA flew A300s for a while? No,
Japan Airlines took them over, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and flew them, but not for long. And I think they had some 737s as well, maybe. So that was the last time there were Airbuses, wide bodies. I think ANA's had A320s for a long time. So they've got that. I wonder... if they like them, they might decide to go on a shopping spree there. Yeah.
Well, people that buy the A350 seem very happy with them.
Yeah, and there's that 1,000, and they're going to make that long range, aren't they?
Yes, they can put the ultra long haul bits into that, and fly 55 people, or 47 to 55 people, 15,000 kilometers.
Wow.
Or 15 more people, 15,000 kilometers. Yeah, and you know, that plane's actually doing very well, considering I think it first flew in 2013, 2014 or something.
Incredible.
They've sold 900, and they've delivered 250 of them. The 787 sold 1,440, and they've already delivered 1,000 of them. So they came quite well from behind.
Yes, they have. Actually, just thinking about that Boeing total, that's 400 to go. How many 787 orders have there been lately?
That's it. Oh well, yeah, not a huge amount, and none for the 8. So it's the 9 and the 1,000, and the 1,000 it seems is selling. The 787-1000 appears to be selling not that well when it comes up in competition against the A350.
Didn't Emirates drop it?
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, so though Air New Zealand could easily have A350 in the fleet, they've got a big A320 fleet, A321 now. Pilots are well versed with flying the Airbus way, so that's not a barrier anymore.
But if they're trying to cut costs, it would make sense for them just to have narrow-body A320s and wide-body 787s, and they've got one plane type across the whole fleet.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, plus the 777s at the top end.
But no, then it would make it sense to have an Airbus family, because you won't want the 737 MAX, will you? So if you want to have that commonality, that family commonality that lowers the cost of training and moving people through the fleets as they go, it's probably better to have Airbus aircraft.
Well, they don't need many. You know, how many would they need? 8, 9?
Yeah.
So they've already got how many? They've got quite a few 787s already. You might as well just top that up. Maybe later on, if they need a plane with, you know, I suspect they're just going to buy more 789s. It's the boringly sensible choice, and probably the one they're going to make.
Getting back to the...
Boeing's going to give them a pretty good deal.
Well, they'll be giving anyone a good deal who stays loyal with them at the moment, probably. Though, going back to, you know, the announcement of the freezing of the salaries and also the deferral of the aircraft, all that sort of stuff, and thinking back to the beginning of the year and one of the podcasts where that news came out, their forward bookings have dropped. This is, I'm sure, the consequence of this drop in bookings, right? I mean, they're looking ahead and they're thinking, we're not going to make as much money, nowhere near it, as we did earlier. So they're getting ready.
Yeah, I think they're definitely getting ready. Yeah.
They can measure that from the bookings. They know the trends. They know what they should have in the can by this point, that point, and yeah.
So it's going to be they're either going to reduce their prices or they're going to shrink.
But don't worry, there's a new safety video on the way.
That's good.
That'll stop it, and that's now AJ Hackett, the guy who basically invented bungee jumping in New Zealand, is going to make one. So we're going back to the tried and true, you know, Queenstown bungee jump thing, you know. Anyway.
If the All Blacks aren't involved or mentioned in that video somewhere, I'll be very disappointed.
They probably will be.
Definitely.
They'll be the ones doing the bungee jumping, won't they?
I expect so.
Yeah, so it looks like the current one's been about to be kicked away. Anyway, so that's interesting. Now to 737 MAX, and the whole thing just keeps getting worse, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
More than you can think.
Yeah.
What are we up to now? Where are we at now? I think Boeing have reported to FAA that they've completed the work needed, software work needed, and they've test flown. I think they've done dozens of flights to make sure
193 hours or something.
MCAS works properly, but that doesn't necessarily mean things are suddenly back to normal. So the FAA have to decide, you know.
Yeah. It is very interesting. A number of things have come out. So Boeing have announced that the software is ready and available. I guess that means it's available and ready to be checked by the FAA, because I can't imagine the FAA is not going to do all the checks themselves. And I wouldn't be surprised if the airline industry got together and said, and we also want to check it. So you're probably looking at least a month. And I say a month. I mean 3, right? Yeah. That now Boeing's come out and admitted that, the simulators don't work properly. as they don't actually mirror the behavior of MCAS that well. Then the American airline pilots recorded that session with Boeing, where Boeing basically flat out denied there was an issue and that it didn't need any extra training. And the pilots were getting quite heated. They were saying, "Oh, we're the last line of defense before a smoking hole in the ground," blah, blah, blah. So that's come about. You've seen that simulator video of forewarned pilots trying to emulate getting out of an MCAS situation, and they couldn't. It took them, 8,000 feet?
Yeah, I think they've got this method where they switch off the electrical power to the trim system, so you can use the manual wheel. But in the nose-over phenomenon with MCAS, the loads are too high. You can't actually move the wheel, So you've got to unload it, which I think means pushing the nose down even further. So, you can progressively restore manual control in sort of bites, but it took 8,000 feet.
The terrible thing here as well is if the second crash hadn't been Ethiopian Airlines, if it had been some other low-cost Asian airline, right? It's only because Ethiopian Airlines is such a respected airline in terms of their engineering and their pilot training that this actually, I think this ended up being the deal it has been.
Right.
I think if it had been another, I'm sure it would have come out, but I reckon it would have taken a week, 3-4 weeks longer to come out. Because it's very easy. Oh, well, they're foreign and they've got really bad maintenance. But you can't say that about Air Ethiopia.
Right.
They are foreign, but they're actually one of those Boeing global partners.
Yeah,
so
they know what they're doing.
Know what they're doing.
Yeah, they kind of do, yeah. So the problem is now that they're all backing up. They're going to run out of space to store these things as they come off the production line, aren't they?
42 a month.
Boy, that piles up. So by the time this runs through, what are we up to now? 2 months?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So 3, 4, 42. That's 150, close to 150 planes. There's no 130 planes.
And if the couple of hundred planes that are already on the ground need modifying, that's all going to take time. They're going to have to fly somewhere.
All the simulators need reprogramming.
Yes. No, it's amazing how much information comes out when something like this happens. There's a particularly interesting slide pack done by the then head of engineering, who apparently was dead set against the MAX. He thought, really, we're trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear here. We do not want to re-engine. They did a design study called the 737RE re-engine, right? But the bizarre thing is the numbers they used when they compared the new generation against the CEO A320 is they were convinced in their mind, right? They were convinced in their mind that the new generation, the 737-800, was even then, was better than the Neo A320 in terms of fuel burn and all these things. And then when they did their pitch, their system against the A320 Neo, which had just been announced, right? They said, Airbus can't do it for less than, I think, $5.5 billion because they're going to have to lengthen the undercarriage, they're going to have to strengthen the wing, they're going to have to do all these things. But the list they have, it's like 7 points, are precisely the things Airbus didn't have to do, but are exactly the things Boeing would have had to have done to make a true competitor. But they were so sort of in their own echo chamber that they just couldn't imagine. They just couldn't imagine that would be the case. And the chief engineer at the time, I forget what his name was, Gallagher or Getty or something, he didn't want to do a re-engine thing. He said, no, we can keep the NG going for a while longer, and we should come out with a new clean sheet design. And the moment American Airlines looked as if they were going to go and buy 400 Neos, Boeing just said, no, they pulled the trigger, said, this is what we're doing. Shareholder value, shareholder value, shareholder value, bang.
Yeah.
And off they went. And their whole mantra was commonality, because as some pilots have been saying, they said, we could fly this plane without MCAS if we knew. That's what training's for.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
You could quite easily put in the training manual, be careful at certain angles of attacks, at certain speeds, at certain power settings. Those nacelles are going to generate lift, and they're going to pitch you nose up even more. So don't get into that handling situation. But of course, that would have done away with the commonality, and that would have required more training, and that's exactly what Boeing is trying to avoid. They were doing all they could to avoid an extra training requirement, because if you've got 10,000 pilots, and they each need 2 to 3 hours training, and then you'd have to update all the simulators, because Boeing were right up until a few weeks ago, you do not need simulator training to fly this aircraft.
Which is like basically saying if you have existing 737 NG simulators, you probably use them where the differences cause. So good.
Give you an iPad and well, you didn't even need simulator training. You could but if you were a new pilot, right? Yes, you could come across and do the simulator training, do the iPad course, and then go and fly.
And then get hit with this.
And then not know about MCAS. And I was talking to somebody, and I actually wrote a response to somebody in a YouTube comment, because I was talking about it with friends, and they were saying, what's the difference between the Boeing and the A320 system, or even the 777 system, or the 787 system? And the benefit of the fly-by-wire is you can design the system so that it does all it can to keep you out of those dangerous areas, right? That's what that envelope protection does. Yeah. You can still crash them, but the plane will give you a lot of warning saying this combination of flight characteristics is going to lead to trouble. Get out, get out, get out. Whereas on the with the MCAS, you've got a system which is it's a software tacked onto an analog system, and all it does is nudge you back into the safe zone when things start going wrong. And as 2 people discovered, it's too late.
Yeah. Well, and that all comes about through, and we discussed it last time pretty well, but this sort of disconnect, the silo mentality where that branch doesn't take part in the integration, so no one communicates there. And then, the fact that no one realised or said or made a connection that the MCAS response in an actual Max simulator was not even the same as real life. That's like having you might as well use your home PC simulator at that level then,
Well, it obviously hadn't been tested, which that raises, that's one of the biggest questions. So obviously nobody cross-checked the real life handling against a simulator, and the simulator manufacturers will say, well, Boeing never told us.
Well,
they just gave us.
And they never told them because they just assumed that this was a fix-all, a silver bullet.
They told them they didn't want it to be a big deal.
Though here, there's a story here in New Zealand today after this helicopter crash back in 2015, Fox Glacier, 7 people killed. I think it was a squirrel. I can't remember. But anyway, what's come out of that inquiry is that the CAA inspectors here were not checking up on any of the claims or reports or assurances made by the helicopter operating company here, and they've actually, in the story, widened it out to the sort of scenic flight industry, that the CAA inspectors were, taking the word of the helicopter company, not doing inspections, and saying that they were too trusting, and that this had resulted in, safety failures in terms of the processes that the CAA had, and that they now have basically changed their inspection regime. Obviously, you've always got to be careful if you're the authority, governing the way this industry operates, that you never get too close to the people you're doing business with, the operators. You can't be their friend.
Isn't that the problem with sort of outsourced government? So government pay lip service to compliance, raise the compliance costs, and it basically comes down, as you've seen with WAF. Unfortunately, you can probably even point to the whole mine inspection thing. As long as you pay your money and as long as you tell us you're doing the right thing, we'll be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff when things go really badly wrong, and we'll blame you and have done with it.
Yeah,
it's terrible. It's terrible. You pay all this. There's all these rules and regulations which are just basically not enforced, and you get a few people out there that say, "Well, I'm not going to do it because they're never going to check." And you know what? They're exactly right.
Yeah.
And every now and again they'll do a sort of a random survey, pick one up, try and make an example out of them, but it doesn't really change the behaviour.
Yeah, he said, our formal investigation, this is the, who's being quoted here? I'll find the...
And it's not the inspectors. I'm sure the inspectors are well up to the job. It's the fact that there's probably very few of them around now.
But that shouldn't be the case. I mean, that doesn't need to be the case. If you don't hire people, you won't have anyone around. But there are plenty of people in the industry that would be able to be trained up in safety. It's a Mr. Gould. He's the chairman of the CAA, and his quote is this: "Our formal investigation found the operator had a poor safety culture with significant shortcomings in its management and systems. We also discovered the operator had previously on multiple occasions misled CAA officers about the matters which were relevant to its compliance with civil aviation rules." Well, you only get to do that if the authority is lenient.
Yeah, exactly. Or discovering all this after the fact, because it's a box-checking exercise, because Mr. Inspector's got to go and see 6 helicopters in a week, whereas previously he'd have spent a week on one helicopter and then gone to the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one, and kept people on their toes.
You want those inspectors to be like coppers, They're always asking questions like, hello, what's going on here? You want them to always be suspicious of the operators. That's what you want in their job description, for God's sake.
And yet you've got armed defenders going around asking people whether they support Donald Trump, right? Armed defenders squad.
I have heard that, yeah. So it's on the formal list of questions to work out whether you're a nut bar or not.
Priorities.
Anyway, I don't think we should venture too close to that, but I've heard that too. So anyway, they're going to change their operating regime. Interesting you mentioned the mines, because they're attempting the Pike River mine entry tomorrow. So... We'll
finally, eh?
Yeah.
Finally.
Well, why didn't they want to go back in there? You know why? Liability.
Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's going to happen. Any other stories out there in aviation? There've been no notable space flights.
There's a lot of talk. Something that interests me. There's a lot of talk now, sort of background babble and chatter about how Airbus are so well positioned with it looks like they're going to buy the Bombardier Shorts Brothers carbon fiber wing manufacturing plant in Northern Ireland.
Oh dear!
Because Bombardier want to sell that, because they kept that when Airbus took over the C Series program. Bombardier Short Brothers kept the wing factory, right?
Right.
So now they want to get rid of it because they've decided aviation is not in their core business. So they put it on the market, basically to scare Airbus into drumming up the money to buy it, because otherwise they say, well, we'll sell it to the Chinese, which is always a fantastic threat. Anyway, There's a lot of talk around the benefits that will give Airbus when it comes to re-winging the A320 or A321. And there's a lot of, particularly on some of the European forums, there's a lot of people who certainly seem to be in the know. Of course, you never really know, and we'll just have to wait this one out. But the C-Series, and there might be something at the Paris Air Show, which is, I believe, next week, or maybe this week, where Airbus announced an A230, which is basically an A319, bottom of the sort of A319, A320 replacement, or a plane in that class. And then eventually people are saying that they'll put a carbon wing on the A321 and lighten it and get it going even further.
That is a hell of a move.
And people and the same people are even saying you can stretch the A321 by about another 3 meters, especially if you put a carbon wing and you reposition it and you change the landing gear. And then basically you're back to a super modern 757, almost a 757-300 replacement.
And speaking of 75s, just reminded me, Iceland Air have got a bit of a problem. They've got 25 75s. They want to retire them. They're going to be replaced entirely by Maxes, and there are no Maxes.
Yes, there are no Maxes. And yeah, I read a story about that actually before the last podcast, where Iceland Air very nearly went with Airbus in their last when they chose the Max, and that this last episode and all the press is not convinced the technicians, because the technicians, they or the technical people, the engineering people, they're well aware of the benefits and disadvantages between aircraft types. But it was the board, who are not necessarily aircraft people, are now a bit sort of, so it's an old plane. You know,
they didn't realize. They didn't kind of
realize.
Well,
maybe it wasn't really drawn to their attention that it's basically an elderly, not that the Airbus isn't an elderly design, right? But it's 20 years younger. And they're thinking, well, the bad press and blah, 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 maybe we should just go with Airbus. And Airbus is, with the ultra-long-range A321LR, or whatever they're calling it, they would easily do Keflavik to the west coast of the States, so they could go deeper into Europe. And yeah, there's a big chance that Icelandair will switch to an all Airbus fleet, which would be quite a big coup. I was reading something else about a guy who flies with, I forget which airline it was, who's operating MAX 10s.
United, is it?
In the States. I think it might be United. And he flies with them a lot from Denver, and he was saying his plane was often delayed. And I don't know Denver Airport at all. And he finally realized it was because when he flew the MAX 10, they always had to wait for the longest runway.
Yeah, that's right. Because it's mile high at Denver, and those they're right at the end of their performance. Obviously, at any sort of weight, anyway.
Yeah, and he says, and he says, that's interesting that he never really twigged that. Yeah, when he flew MAX 10, it was always delayed because they had to wait for the longest runway. But the A321 wasn't, because apparently it doesn't need the longest runway.
Yeah. Look, I think the MAX it's dead. What they call it now, they're going to have to change that name, but the orders will. I don't think the orders are going to go too well. And that's my gut.
They'll fire sell them. You know, I wonder whether the marketing. I mean, I'd be very interested to see how the marketing people are trying to come up with a sales campaign. It is going to be hard. It is, because now people are just going to ask a lot more questions, because a lot of these things are being brought out into the open. You know, takeoff performance, safety. You know, like I don't know how many people didn't realize. Now, I don't know how many people think that having an emergency slide on the door is a good thing to have, right? 737s don't have them, right? Because they're essentially sitting on the ground. But there's lots of little tidbits like this in the news where people say, well, you know, one of the reasons they're cheaper is you don't have to inspect the underdoor emergency slides because they don't have them, or the fact that they've got the old style hinged emergency door, so you can actually open the emergency door and check it and shut it again. Whereas on any other plane, you pop the emergency door, it's actually a bit of a hassle to put it back in, right?
Yeah.
And all this type of thing. It's the public knowledge.
Well, that's it. They've been exposed, and over a long period of time, many repetitions every day, actually. So, you know, and people are aware of that name, that MAX name. It's gone. It's definitely gone. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see what they do. But we keep coming back to that. I found something interesting. I like, as I'm sure many of the people who listen to this do, I like watching old videos of flying machines on YouTube. And one that I've watched a few times is that Cheyenne AH-56 Lockheed. And it was a really cool helicopter. I think it was developed in the late 60s, 70s, and it was going to be the sort of Airwolf of its day, a compound helicopter with a step tandem cockpit, a big propeller sticking out the back, you know, a pusher propeller, like a 6-bladed or a 5-bladed pusher propeller, stub wings that provided lift, so it was a true compound helicopter, and it performed magnificently, apparently. It was super fast, highly maneuverable, but they had issues with the software, and of course, you know, in the era, they had a fantastically complicated terrain following radar and targeting system, which they basically never really got to work. And the program got massively over budget and subsequently cancelled. Well, the cool thing is that Boeing Sikorsky have put forward a modification. They call it the Block 2 AH-64 Compound Apache.
Wow.
And basically they've resurrected the Cheyenne. So it's an Apache helicopter. with rearward pointing exhaust to get a bit of thrust out of it, and a big propeller sticking out the back, which increases speed and range by at least 50%, they're saying. So without losing any of the other good things that Apaches can apparently do.
Yeah,
so that's interesting.
The old Cheyenne, I was looking at pictures of it when you mentioned it before, and gosh, they're a hot-looking machine.
Yeah, big too.
Yeah. Okay, so that's like a blast from the past in a way.
Yeah, well, a rerun.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah, what do they call it? A retread or a redo? Or...
And another thing I didn't realize, I mean, because I don't know anything about it, but I'm just interested. You know, you take that the big FA-18, the G or the D, they can put another 2,000 liters of it using those conformal tanks, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, you know, where they sort of scab them onto the outside of the airframe and with unlikely shapes and curves and everything.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't want to go, well, just through the transonic range, it increases the drag. But in normal cruise flight and everything, it actually reduces the drag on the airframe, which I thought was quite interesting. So it's almost a win-win. You're getting a whole bunch more fuel and less drag.
That is a win-win.
Which I thought was quite interesting, because when you look at it, it just looks like someone just molded a whole lot of plasticine into all the corners.
Didn't the hump on the 747 also decrease drag?
Yes.
Less drag if it had just been continuous?
It was at the cruise, right? Yeah, it was at certain thing. Yeah, it actually helped the drag. Yeah.
One thing before we stop talking about the stuff that's happening right now is there was a report a week or so ago that Air New Zealand were having a few problems with their Pratt & Whitney geared turbofans. Not the gearbox, but they were talking about fan blades and seals. So I don't know.
The seals
is all about.
The seals has been a recurring issue that apparently has been fixed. So they should have. I'm pretty sure in New Zealand they've already got kits to fix the seals, and I wonder why Pratt & Whitney are having problems with those seals. What's different about that engine than other engines?
Is there anything different about Air New Zealand's operation? Where they operate from, the environmental factors, I wonder. But
you've also got problems on that LEAP, the LEAP engine on the 78 MAX. You know, when Southwest Airlines ferried theirs to the desert, right? They had to make a diversionary landing because they lost an engine.
Right.
And that's because that LEAP engine, it's the LEAP something 67, I think is the model 67A or something. These LEAP engines, they didn't go geared, obviously, because they can't put a much bigger fan on the plane. So they're running a smaller core, incredibly hot, very, very hot. And obviously that leads to higher efficiencies and more heat, more power. But they're getting coking. So they're having a problem with the combustion, and they've just issued an airworthiness directive on all those engines that they've got to be checked quite often now to check up on this coking, because it can cause engine failure.
Wow. Okay.
Carbonizing the fuel or the exhaust onto the turbine blades.
Okay. Well, it doesn't seem to have been a major. Otherwise, we would have heard more. But it was reported.
Well, they're not flying. They're all on the ground.
Oh no, those ones are. I'm talking about the Air New Zealand thing. Yeah. But those ones are. Yeah. So just something else to worry about with the MAX.
Well, it seems that the engine manufacturers are they're doing it hard. You know, it seems to be. Yeah, it's
well, the more you try and squeeze out of them, the more you go to the edge of the known envelopes and the parameters. Interesting. This is a good lead into. I was just looking at a history page here of aviation history moments just in the last 3 days. Okay, so May 19th, 20th. We're 20th today, 21st. And I don't know what it is about May. Charles Lindbergh did his flight on this day to Paris from New York. 3,600 miles in 33 hours, 29 minutes. He won the Orteg Prize, wasn't it? 25 grand back then was the prize. That's a lot of money. In the Spirit of St. Louis. I've seen the Spirit of St. Louis hanging from the ceiling of the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. Tiny little plane, Ryan monoplane. It had a periscope, you know.
Yes, so you could see out, yeah.
So that was that. But if you look back on yesterday, the 19th, this one got my eye. This day back in 34, the first flight of the Tupolev ANT-20 Maxim Gorky. Remember that thing? It was gigantic.
Yes.
It was the largest aircraft in the world at the time,
Yes.
powered by 8 engines.
Had a balcony.
And it could carry 80 passengers.
Yeah.
It was used mainly, it says here, as a mobile propaganda office.
Yeah, isn't that the one? No, it didn't have a balcony. It had windows in the leading edge.
Windows in the leading edge, that's right. Yeah, 80 passengers for 1934, not bad.
No, yeah, not bad at all.
How's this for passengers? This day, yesterday, May 19th, 49, United States Navy flying boat, one of those Marshall Mars, you know, those.
Oh, yeah.
Landed after flying from Alameda near San Francisco with a record 301 passengers.
Gee.
And for
they could do it.
And for 707 Freaks, this day back in 59, the first 707-436 Intercontinental. They were the BOAC Rolls-Royce Conway-powered 70s. First one flew on this day, this last few days, back in 59. Boy, that's a long time ago now. What's that, 60 years ago?
Yeah, think of that, eh?
I could hear the frog in the background, by the way.
Yeah.
And today, the first woman to ascend in a tethered balloon in France. This day, 1784. And also, what was the other thing that caught my eye? That Glenn Curtis, you know, remember Curtis aircraft?
Yeah.
He was born May 21st. A lot of activity, a lot of history. Oh, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan lost in the Pacific this day in 1937. Interesting.
I was driving around upstate New York when I lived over there. And I think I've probably told you this before. And I forget what the town was called, but it was near an area called the Finger Lakes. There's these long, thin lakes pointing sort of north-south. We went into this little town, and bang, there was the Glenn Curtis Museum. Couldn't believe it. It was a fantastic museum, a massive museum, and it's a pretty big museum in this tiny little town. And they lost a day there.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. That guy, such an incredible early pioneer.
Interesting. The ailerons were connected to the arms of the seat, so you leant yourself left and right, side to side, and that the plane then leant with you, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, interesting. So I should update.
Just went fore and aft.
I should update. Well, it's like the twisting wings, you know. Very early on. That didn't last long. Some Bring Our Birds Home news for our listeners, Martin, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I think we'll update. Okay, so we've been told, Brazil, we've been told verbally that the decision, things goes on forever, the decision by the judge to allow us to buy the DC-8 from Infraero has been made. We've had it verbally from via our guy there from Infraero that it's a positive decision, that will be coming through. But what we need is the piece of paper. So we're happy, but we're still waiting. Also, we've approached the Air Force. They've taken the nose off the RNZAF 727 that was sitting derelict at Woodburn and Blenheim. They've taken the forward bit of the nose off. They've got to put that in the museum in Christchurch, the Air Force Museum. We've approached the Air Force to pick up the rest of the fuselage. That's everything from the forward part of the wing down to the rear of the fuselage. It's missing a tail. And missing the engines, but the wings are there. The wings are intact. And Martin, I don't need to tell you, that wing is incredible.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that wing, moving in and out, which is the intention. And also the gears are there, so we can have the main gears on display. We'd like to see them retracting up and down. Point is, it looks like we'll get it. The museum in Wanaka will transport the components down there, set them up. We're going to get our JT8D turbofans, which are sitting in California in storage at the moment, out. We're going to put that with them, and that will be hopefully, our first display.
Nice.
And then it's not too much of a stretch to find another forward fuselage for a 727. There are hundreds of them still sitting in the desert to eventually put back on the front to restore the entire plane. But in doing all this, we think we've found out where the other, because there were two, of course, where the other one is, and that's at Rand Airport in South Africa.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just sitting there. It's complete. I think what happened is hit up against like 38 or 39,000 cycles, and whoever was operating it around Africa, I think it went there for maintenance, never left.
Okay.
So, and it's, from what we can make out, been sitting there since 05, 06.
Wow.
So that's handy. But anyway, so that's happened there. As soon as we have that confirmed to us by the person responsible for disposing of that airframe at the Air Force, we'll be making a big noise about that. And also, next week, I think it's 11 aircraft that the museum have bought in Australia from the museum that went belly up, including a Hawker Siddeley 748. They're going to be shipped over to Wanaka. So, this year, a lot's going to happen there. I think it'll take his aircraft artefact total to about 30, right, with these ones. And then we get these other ones in, it gets even more. In fact, it's got to the point now, the museum next door, which is the old Warbirds over Wanaka Museum, which is still operating, that the Wanaka Transport and Toy Museum will have all the aircraft they have bar one. So there's probably no reason for them to exist next door soon. So, yeah, it's amazing how things have gone. It's really growing potentially into a very, very big offering, A
rich collection.
Well, you think about it. Imagine even the, like I say to people, the dismantled airframes, as long as they're the original ones, people are going to come and see them.
Yeah.
Because they have artefact value that is separate from the aircraft they are, the model they are. They're actually historical artifacts. It's like coming to see a waka or a, captain, the steering wheel, the helm's wheel of the Endeavour or something. It's like that,
Yeah.
So we're pretty happy about that. So hopefully we'll get that 7.2. But those like I say, they're great wings. I think people will be very interested to see how they work. And my video of the 727 flap system working on YouTube has done over 1 million views. That's how popular that is.
There you go. Yeah, don't you wish they had monetization back in the day?
Well, actually, I've made quite a bit of money out of that clip.
Okay, well,
it is monetized, and I do all right.
Okay, nice.
It probably earns $30 or $40 a month.
Oh, nice, yeah.
Yeah, but it's by far one of the most watched.
Pays the phone bills.
So, we're getting there. Keep on pushing, but it's got bigger picture. But, it'd be nice to have new things to announce all the time, big announcements. But, this is part of this sort of playing this sort of game. You've got to be patient, and it's a long game, and it's all about relationships. And I think we're nearly there on the DC-8. And it'd be great to have the 727. They were ex-United ones, Martin.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we got 3. First one was, I think, flew about 20 hours for the RNZAF, and then they parked it and they used it as a parts supply. They cannibalised it to keep the other 2 flying.
It was always nice watching it rocket out of Wellington.
Oh, yeah, because they always flew them light, of course, and 3 engines and those big wings. That aircraft was made for short, provincial, small city runways. LaGuardia.
To get into LaGuardia, without ending up in the water at the end of the runway.
5,200, I think, was the runway length when the 7.2 at LaGuardia when the 7.2 came out. So it had to be able to operate to all the publicised, and that's transcontinental. They could fly out of, I think, out of LaGuardia from there. So a very, very historic plane. So we're happy about that. So that brings everybody up to date on the Bring Our Birds Home. And I will do a video, everybody. I will do a video update. This is what I vowed back in October last year. The next video update will be a major announcement. And I have to keep to that.
Okay.
So, maybe the 7.2 will be major, but I think it'll be the DC-8. Yeah, anyway. And we'll film the whole shifting of it on the trucks and everything by drone. And you can imagine taking it from Blenheim all the way down through that beautiful country to Wanaka is going to look amazing.
It will. It will.
It will look amazing. And the Christchurch people can promote us with the forward part of the fuselage, and we'll promote them with the rest of it. But eventually we will complete the plane, and it'll be the whole plane. Anyway.
Yeah. It's nice to have something to do, eh?
You got to have a hobby, Martin. You got to have a hobby.
Got to have a hobby, yeah.
I thoroughly recommend it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, it's
all right.
We've been talking for over an hour now.
Too long. People get bored after a while. So,
stream of consciousness.
Okay, and the other thing is, I'm thinking about guests. I know we haven't. I said that we would have some, but it's turned out to be quite difficult to arrange people into specific times, Martin.
Yeah, I know.
Especially people, internationally, where timelines are all over the place. So,
yeah.
If things come up, we'll do it, but don't hold us to it every time.
Yeah, see what we get, eh?
Yeah, exactly. See what we get.
Yeah.
All right, so that's our podcast 4, recorded on the 20th of May 2019, NZ Aviation Podcast. From me in Auckland, New Zealand, it's goodbye. That's Paul Brennan. And where the frogs are making a noise in the background, Martin?
Yeah, Martin in Brisbane still.
All right. Didn't hear any birds, only frogs tonight.
No, it's a bit darker, a bit cooler. Birds have maybe moved back to their nest.
All right, well, we'll see you soon.
All right, see you later.